Part 22. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 211. Zhou Dongfei's eyes were fixed on Lin Meijiao. At this time, Lin Meijiao suddenly laughed. "What do you think? Mr. Zhou? Just now you were the first." At this time, Zhou Dongfei finally realized how scary this woman Lin Meijiao was. Although he had been in the upper hand in the negotiations just now, just a moment later, the situation between the two of them suddenly changed. "Very good, I like to cooperate with smart women. At least some things are easy to understand, which is much better than those stupid people." Lin Meijiao heard this, and after Zhou Dongfei said this, she nodded slightly. "I also like working with smart men like you." At this time, Lin Meijiao's face was still expressionless, but when she heard the sound of the door opening, a charming smile appeared on her face again. When Sun Yuuru saw the two people, they looked like they were having a good conversation, and their eyes were about to burst out with fire. Although Sun Yuuru was very angry in her heart, she was still very professional and sent the clothes to Lin Meijiao. "This sister is so beautiful. Mr. Zhou is indeed very lucky." Lin Meijiao's voice was not loud, but it was not quiet either, especially her smile, which had a special meaning. Sun Yuuru's pretty face turned red. "What are you talking about, Miss Lin? I am not as beautiful as Miss Lin, let alone as hot as Miss Lin." Zhou Dongfei was standing aside, his eyes fixed on Lin Meijiao. Unfortunately, this beautiful woman had nothing to do with him, but he thought that maybe the relationship between this woman and Lin Yu was unusual. And just a moment later, Zhou Dongfei seemed to remember something. He suddenly took a step forward and pulled out a camera from his office. Zhou Dongfei crushed the camera like this, and his expression began to become more and more gloomy. "It seems like the action will be a little faster this time. After all, it seems like someone can't hold it any longer." There was a bit of coldness in Zhou Dongfei's eyes, and the murderous intention on his body was even more looming. The cold aura on his body quietly emerged, making people feel a sense of it. A chilling feeling. Zhou Dongfei decided to play a big game. Of course, this big game would naturally start with Lin Yu. Lin Yu was very powerful, and now, he was in this ancient tomb. In fact, the reason why an ancient tomb is assigned a task is entirely because there is a Chaos Wolf bead in the ancient tomb. This Chaos Wolf bead is said to be worth 1,000 years to the owner. It is priceless but has no market. Zhou Dongfei himself was engaged in selling these treasures, so of course he understood the preciousness of them, so at this time, the smile on the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious. "I don't know Miss Lin, but do you know Lin Yu?" Zhou Dongfei turned his head and glanced at Lin Meijiao. His eyes evoked a bit of special brilliance, and the corners of his eyes and brows showed a bit of specialness. At this moment, his eyes were staring at Lin Meijiao. Not at all. Lin Meijiao would not let go of any expression on her face. At this time, after Lin Meijiao heard what Zhou Dongfei said, she was slightly stunned at first, but then she nodded slightly, with a hint of a smile at the corner of her mouth. "I've heard a lot about it, but I don't know. Why are you asking these questions? Or what's the use of asking these questions to you?" Lin Meijiao's eyes were fixed on listening to Zhou Dongfei. At this time, after Zhou Dongfei heard what Lin Meijiao said, the corners of his mouth also raised a somewhat evil arc. "He must be from your Lin family." At this time, Lin Meijiao was stunned at first, and then she shook her head slightly. "You really guessed wrong this time. He is really not from our Lin family. I have never heard of this guy in the Lin family." Obviously, Zhou Dongfei categorically did not believe Lin Meijiao's words, so at this time, Zhou Dongfei's eyes were fixed on Lin Meijiao. His eyes were quite complicated, and the corners of his mouth curled up. A faint smile. "Really not?" "Of course not, but I have a way to contact this guy. After all, they have been in the world of alien beasts for a long enough time, and now they have discovered that the Aboriginal organizers feel a little unsafe and are planning to let them finish this time. After the collapse, call them back. The news that Lin Mei Jiao was named Zhou Dongfei I really didn't expect, really. Certainly. Lin Yu, who was still in the ancient tomb at this time, certainly didn't know that a conspiracy was surrounding him, and an invisible web was slowly unfolding towards him. Arya's voice suddenly sounded in Lin Yu's mind. Side mission, kill the ice and fire beasts, reward 1 million points. The mission is optional and can trigger hidden missions. When Lin Yu heard Arya's voice, a bit of excitement seemed to flash through his eyes, and then a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Accept the mission. But where is this fire and ice beast now? According to the location, it should be in a side room, but the information I can provide you is only this far, and the rest depends on you. Arya said to Lin Yu slowly. At this moment, 3 black lines appeared on Lin Yu's forehead, and he was speechless. Then what? Apart from this, is there no other news? Arya spread her hands helplessly, a bitter smile appeared at the corner of her mouth, and a bit of helplessness flashed in her eyes. That's right, there is no other news. If I force you to provide information, the system will erase part of my authority. Lin Yu. But aren't you the system now? This has always been Lin Yu's confusion. Arya seems to be controlled by the system everywhere, but in some cases, she can manipulate the system. Lin Yu can't figure out what kind of relationship the two have. After hearing what Lin Yu said, Arya smiled bitterly. Actually, that's not the case. There are some things I can't tell you, otherwise I will be punished. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 212. At this time, after Arya heard Lin Yu say this, a wry smile appeared at the corner of her mouth, and her eyes were full of helplessness. Tell the truth. 3 black lines appeared on Lin Yu's forehead. Of course I'm telling the truth. Actually, I am just an ordinary soul, but because I have stayed here for a long time, I have some understanding of the system. As for being able to issue system tasks, it is because I was recognized by a part of the system by chance. Arya spoke to Lin Yu softly. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what Arya said, his eyes narrowed to a slit. A special color flashed in his eyes, and then he turned his head, with his eyes staring straight. Staring at Arya. Although I don't know what is going on, I still feel that this matter is not that simple. Is it really as you said? Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on Arya. At this time, Arya was stared at by Lin Yu, and a bit of complexity flashed in his eyes, and then the corners of his eyes and eyebrows showed a bit of shyness. Lin Yu looked at Arya, with a look on her face that was hesitant to speak. She was obviously aware that something was wrong, so at this time, she stared at Arya with the corners of her mouth curled up. There were a few meaningful smiles. You must be hiding something from me. Lin Yu's eyes never left Arya's body. At this time, Arya shook her head helplessly, and a wry smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. There is something I really can't tell you, and I hope you can understand. At this time, Lin Yu just waved his hand gently. It doesn't matter. It's good that you can give me these tips, so there is no need to blame yourself. Having these tips is much better than having no tips at all, no. After Lin Yu thought of this, he just waved his hand gently and smiled, but he didn't say anything more. After a moment, Lin Yu seemed to suddenly remember something, and he walked straight ahead. King Guzhu looked at Lin Yu in a daze at first, and then walked straight forward after finishing the work, with a bit of confusion flashing in his eyes. What's going on with this little guy? I really don't know what kind of medicine he is selling in this gourd. At this time, the male snake man walked up to King Guzhu and whispered softly. King Guzhu's face was slightly condensed, and a special light flashed in his eyes. He turned his head and glanced at the snake man. Are you telling the truth? Are you sure you don't lie to me? King Guzhu's eyes were fixed on the male snake man. At this time, after the male snake man heard what King Guzhu said, he subconsciously took a few steps back to the side, and then the scene was cut like this. Wave your hands. Of course I don't dare to lie in the slightest, what I said is absolutely true. At this time, King Guzhu suddenly smiled. Don't be so nervous. Why are you so nervous? I believe you won't lie to me. If this is the case, then the next step will be easy. King Guzhu subconsciously glanced at the tomb keeper. At this moment, the tomb keeper was suddenly startled, and then he turned his head and glanced at the snake man. His eyes seemed to be filled with emotion. There was a flash of solemnity, and he deliberately lowered his voice and said to the snake man, "What did you just say to King Guzhu?" After the snake man told the tomb keeper everything about the previous events, a sneer appeared on the tomb keeper's lips at this moment. Do you think I will believe you? At this time, the snake man was also slightly annoyed. She just turned her head and glanced coldly at the tomb keeper. There seemed to be a bit of coldness in her eyes, and there was murderous intention in her body. It was also released quietly like this. What do you want? I can't care, and I'm too lazy to care. If you don't believe me, then you don't believe it. It doesn't matter to me at all. At this time, after hearing what the male snake man said, the tomb guard's eyes turned quite gloomy, and the murderous intention in his body quietly began to emerge. You are really betraying me, aren't you? Woman, you will regret it. After the tomb keeper finished speaking, he began to take out a gloomy soul nail from his waist. His eyes were quite cold, and so was the murderous intention in his body. He began to release it without reservation. The gloomy smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. Since you are unkind, don't blame me for being unjust. At this time, the male snake seemed to have noticed something was wrong with the tomb keeper. She turned her head and only glanced at the tomb keeper coldly. I advise you to calm down. You should know that the relationship between the two of us is nothing more than this. If I want to kill you, I guarantee that King Guzhu will never come to me to cause trouble. The tomb guard is quite confident. Of course he is confident, because he is very familiar with the environment in this ancient tomb, even more familiar than King Guzhu, so of course he is not afraid of what King Guzhu will do. The king of Guzhu would at most laugh at things that hurt him. At this time, the Grava keeper's mouth corners could not help but raise a few evil arcs, and his eyes were staring straight at the Mew Snake Man, and at this time, the Mew Snake Man's eyes flashed a few cold lights, and she couldn't help swallowing her saliva. But I really didn't say anything more. What I said to the king of Guzhu was just the thing I just told you. The male snake man's eyes were quite sincere. After the gravekeeper saw the male snake man like this, his heart couldn't help but have some waves. A few complexities flashed in his eyes, and then he just waved his sleeves heavily. Forget it, let's put this matter aside for now. If there is really a next time, I will never let you go. After the gravekeeper finished speaking, he turned around and walked away. At this time, the male snake man, who was originally pitiful, couldn't help but raise a few evil arcs at the corners of his mouth, but the coldness of the smoke and dust was fleeting and disappeared immediately. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 213. At this time, Lin Yu glanced at Guzhu King after waking up. His eyes were quite solemn, and the corner of his mouth evoked a wry smile. Lord King Guzhu, it seems that this time, I'm afraid. At this time, when the king of Guzhu heard what Lin Yu said, a strange color flashed in his eyes, and then his glasses were nailed to Lin Yu's body, and his eyes were even more intense. It's somewhat complicated. What might it be this time? Get up and talk to me. I'm afraid we have to go back first, I have some things that need to be taken care of. At this moment, Lin Yu said in a cold voice. After hearing what Lin Yu said, King Guzhu turned his head and glanced in his direction. A few complex colors flashed in his eyes, and then he couldn't help but feel so slightly frowned. What do you need to deal with? Can you tell me about it? The king of Guzhu's eyes were as bright as a torch, and his eyes were fixed on Lin Yu's body. There was a bit of doubt in his eyes, and it was obvious that he did not believe what Lin Yu said at this moment. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what King Guzhu said, the corners of his mouth curled up into a somewhat meaningful smile. Is there something you're hiding from me? If so, just tell me. I won't tell you to go. King Guzhu's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and there seemed to be a bit of majesty in his eyes. At this time, Lin Yu seemed to have suddenly remembered something. He just waved his hand gently and smiled. It's indeed my fault that I kept some things from you, but there are some things that I hope you won't interfere with. After all, they are some private matters. I will feel sorry if I trouble you. After the king of Guzhu heard what Lin Yu said, his eyes were staring straight at him. At this time, he also narrowed his eyes in the same way, and then there was a hint of vagueness at the corner of his mouth. Smile. Since you don't want to say more, I won't ask any more questions this time. Lin Yu nodded slightly, a bit of complexity seemed to flash through his eyes, and there was something strange in the corners of his eyes and brows. A moment later, King Guzhu suddenly laughed. He turned his head and glanced at Lin Yu, and then waved his hand gently. Remember to move faster, we still need you on the road ahead. Lin Yu nodded lightly, and then walked to the side room. The eyes of the king of Guzhu were fixed on Lin Yu, and there was quite a bit of complexity in his eyes. Just a moment later, a figure suddenly came to the side of the king of Guzhu. Who else could this person be if he wasn't a snake man? The male snake man took a look, the king of Guzhu. Your Majesty, look. The king of Guzhu just waved his hand so gently, and then a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Just let him go as he wants. There is no need to worry about so much, and there is no need to pay attention to so much. Anyway, as long as he doesn't delay what we are doing. King Guzhu's eyes were staring straight at Lin Yu's back. At this time, he seemed to have no idea what kind of things he was planning. After a while, as soon as Lin Yu arrived at a place, he suddenly smelled the smell of blood. In the side room. After Li Junzhong devoured the power of his companions, he stared directly at Wang Yu and the others. He licked his scarlet lips. At this time, in such a desperate situation, he seemed to have forgotten. In order to hide his true nature, his eyes showed a blood-red color. It's interesting, it's really interesting. It's been a long time since I've been able to devour other people's power so happily. You are honored to become a part of my body. In the future, my power will reach a level that you can't even imagine. Ha 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 ha. At this time, it was not just the Dragon Kingdom players present who saw this scene. In fact, the most terrifying thing for Li Junzhong was probably that this game was broadcast live to all over the world. After all the people saw this scene, their eyes were full of disbelief. At this moment, they looked at this scene, and their pupils were full of fear. I didn't expect that Country H would actually have such terrifying monsters. Hasn't Country H been claiming that if its country is powerful, it will never touch those dangerous beasts? But it seems that this is obviously not the case. In this way, the eyes of all the people were full of disbelief. At this time, they looked at each other, and after swallowing a few mouthfuls of saliva, they didn't know what to say for a while. Almost all the high-level officials knew about this big secret of Country H at the same time, so these powerful countries united together and quickly started a meeting. Even Country M, which has always supported Country H, actually started to prepare a plan to deal with Country H at this moment. High-level officials of country H. Asshole, this bastard Li Junzhong has completely tarnished the image of our country. People like this deserve to die, they deserve to die. After the top executive of country H finished speaking, he slammed the table so hard, and then his chest began to rise and fall violently, and his eyes were quite sinister and cold. At this time, a man in a black robe slowly walked in. The man's face was blocked by the shadow of a hat, and no one could see what the man looked like. Don't be so anxious. Now this little guy is still a person, isn't he? So why are you so angry? He can't represent your H country, but that Lin Yu, I remember I once said that I can provide you with these powerful beasts from another world, but I also have a condition, that is, to collect Lin Yu's information. Such a long time has passed, where is his information? The guy's voice was low and hoarse, and his eyes were staring straight at the high level of H country in front of him. After seeing this scene, the high level of H country also swallowed a mouthful of saliva, and the horror in his eyes could not be disguised at all. And just after this moment, the black-robed man slowly walked in front of the high level of H country, his eyes were fixed on him, and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 214. Looking at you like this, I can understand that you are not prepared for anything. But for me, it doesn't matter. I can still give you a chance. Now Lin Yu should be on his way to your team members. Don't mess up these things again. Although H country wants to try its best to distance itself from Li Junzhong, this last chess piece still needs to be used. This is their only idea at the moment. It was not until the black-robed man left for a long time that the senior officials of H country breathed a sigh of relief. There was a flash of special colors in the eyes of the senior officials of H country, and then his eyes looked into the distance. After a moment, a man wearing glasses and a suit pushed the door open. The senior officials of H country turned around and just glanced at him coldly, with a faint smile on the corner of his mouth. I think you should know what I want to do this time. Do it for me. I won't treat you unfairly after it's done. The man in the suit pushed his glasses. He certainly knew that the actions of all the people in H country at such a critical moment must be seen by the 9 major countries, so this time he was pushed out to contact Li Junzhong, just to find a scapegoat. At this time, the man in the suit also gritted his teeth, and then immediately after this moment, as if he had made up his mind, a bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were full of helplessness. At present, do I have any choice? The senior officials of H country just smiled slightly. You seem to have no choice, an invisible big net is spreading. Of course, the people watching this live broadcast all over the world don't seem to understand. They only know that according to the news from the maker of the rules, the exploration plan of the first season seems to be coming to an end after the end of this ancient tomb. At that time, the contestants will be sent back and recuperate for a period of time. Those who can advance to the second round will re-enter this world and will be arranged to participate in the Tianjiao conference. And according to Lin Yu's experience in the Misty Forest in the first season, there seems to be aboriginals here, and these aboriginals seem to participate in the second season. Everyone's blood boiled when they thought of this. And just after this moment, everyone's thoughts were pulled back in an instant. Li Junzhong turned his head and stared at Wang Yu. He seemed to be quite interested in Wang Yu, because even he himself didn't know why. He always felt that Wang Yu's fragrance was very special, and this special fragrance just touched every nerve of his. Li Junzhong licked his scarlet lips, and after a moment, Li Junzhong slowly walked towards Wang Yu. The yin and yang bats behind him were flapping their wings, which seemed to give everyone a strong deterrent, and everyone couldn't help but feel a little fear in their hearts. Wang Yu subconsciously took a few steps back, and then looked at Bai Mu. Bai Mu stepped forward, staring at Li Junzhong, with murderous intent on his body, and a cold aura spread out. Although his strength might not be as good as Li Junzhong at the moment, his aura at the moment was no worse for Li Junzhong. At this time, Li Junzhong suddenly laughed. He turned his head and stared at Bai Mu. A cold aura spread out, and a few cold lights flashed in his eyes. Interesting, you are really interesting. You dare to be so presumptuous in front of me. Are you really tired of living? Li Junzhong stared at Bai Mu with his eyes, and at this time, although Bai Mu was a little scared, he still gritted his teeth. I am from Longguo. Don't forget that this is being broadcast live around the world. If you dare to attack me, I guarantee that you will be in trouble. Bai Mu's threat was obvious, but after hearing what Bai Mu said, Li Junzhong laughed wildly as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world. Ha ha ha, interesting, interesting, it's really a big joke. Do you think I have a way out since I started to devour their power? At this time, Bai Mu heard Li Junzhong say this, and a few special colors flashed in his eyes. At this time, he took a deep breath, calmed down his mood a little, and then turned his head to look at Bai Mu. I understand what you mean. Even if you don't care about breaking up with Longguo, your strength now doesn't allow you to be so arrogant and presumptuous. At this time, Bai Mu said in a cold voice. After he finished speaking, a nine-headed strange bird suddenly appeared behind him, flapping its wings and spewing out flames. Bai Mu stared at Li Junzhong in front of him, and after seeing the nine-headed flamingo, Li Junzhen's face began to become slightly solemn, at least not as arrogant as before. A sneer appeared at the corner of Li Junzhen's mouth. At this moment, his eyes were staring directly at Bai Mu, with a kind of contempt in the corners of his eyes and brows. Who do you think I am? It's just a broken bird. I really don't understand who gave you such courage. You actually dare to be so arrogant and wanton like me. It's ridiculous to say the least. After Li Junzhong finished speaking, he suddenly took a step forward. At this time, he was very fast. He was already there in one breath and one breath. In front of the white curtain, his eyes were so fixed at this moment. After staring at the white screen and seeing this scene, I couldn't help but tremble slightly in my heart. The smile at the corner of Li Junzhen's mouth began to become more and more obvious, as if he was mocking Bai Mu. Bai Mu's face began to look a little ugly. You bastard, you still dare to tease me. If I don't kill you this time, it will be hard to eliminate the hatred in my heart. After seeing the nine-headed flamingos, all the viewers in the live broadcast room were filled with shock. After all, these nine-headed flamingos are rare. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 215. Who is this guy? How could he own this nine-headed flamingo? Besides, shouldn't the nine-headed flamingo have been extinct long ago? What's going on now? Yes, it seems that Bai Mu doesn't show off his abilities on weekdays, but in fact, he is a tough guy. Don't make blind guesses. It's obvious that Bai Mu is not a good guy. It looks like this time is going to be interesting. Exotic Beast, Nine-Headed Flamingo Lord Level 6, Level 49. Qualification, Alien, Intermediate. Life, 999999999. Speed, 999999999. Defense, 999999999. Attack, 999999999. Skills, Blazing Sky, Day and Night, Burn Nothingness. Burning Sky, the nine-headed flamingo activates a skill that can eject nine-headed flames from its mouth. The nine-headed flames have 9 different temperatures, but they are miraculously integrated into the same flame, which can effortlessly burn everything in front of it. Day and Night, the nine-headed flamingo activates a skill that instantly changes the color of the sky and the earth, reverses yin and yang, makes reincarnation impermanent, makes the sky and the earth colorless, and makes the day and night sleepless. The power is extraordinary and beyond the imagination of ordinary people. Burn the Void, the nine-headed flamingo activates a skill that can turn the flames into nothingness, and can make the yin and yang creation return to peace and quiet, and the world changes color, and the law of Taoism becomes impermanent. Although the nine-headed flamingo can only use fire, this fire is not an ordinary fire. The power and wonder of this fire are beyond the reach of ordinary people and beyond the imagination of ordinary people. After this moment, the yin and yang of the world are here, and at the same time, they begin to become mysterious. This illusory scene seems to give people a special color. And until this moment, the corner of Bai Mu's mouth is raised with a faint smile. Such evil things are the most fearful to my nine-headed flamingo, so I advise you to retreat obediently. I am in a good mood today and don't want to have to fight with you. At this time, the yin-yang bat seemed to feel the power of the nine-headed flamingo, and made a few strange noises. Not only that, but his wings were flapping desperately, and the space around him was faintly agitated. At this moment, Li Junzhong saw this scene. Not only did he not feel a bit of fear, but the excitement on his face began to become more obvious than before. Ha 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 ha, not bad, not bad, this blood must be very nourishing. If I swallow your blood, my strength will definitely be greatly improved compared to before. Li Junzhen's eyes had flashed a bit of madness, and at this time he seemed to have gone completely crazy. Li Junzhen's eyes were fixed on the nine-headed flamingo. At this time, the yin-yang bat also made a long cry, as if it was singing a song to guide the way, which made people feel the fear in it. Li Junzhong moved suddenly, and the yin-yang bat also moved suddenly. The wrath of the blood symbol, the realm of heaven and earth, yin-yang xiantian. Li Junzhong spoke these words so lightly, and his speech speed was very fast. Then, the yin-yang bat had already emitted a dark red light. At this moment, the special lines on his body were also faintly emitting a very special luster. Li Junzhen's eyes had already shown a kind of red color, and he suddenly rushed towards Bai Mu. This was simply a desperate fighting style, and he didn't even leave a way out for himself. Bai Mu had no choice but to take the move by force. At this time, he gritted his teeth, and a bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. It seems that if you don't show some real skills this time, you will be looked down upon. The flames burn the sky, and in the white night, burn the void. When Bai Mu said this, the nine-headed flamingo's body instantly glowed red, and at this moment, a field of flame suddenly filled the narrow range of the ancient tomb, but for some reason, under such a hot temperature, the wall of the ancient tomb did not move at all. Everyone's eyes were watching the battle situation in the scene, but after seeing this scene, some of the top leaders of this big country became a little solemn. It's exactly the same as expected at the beginning. The situation here is really unusual. It seems that this time it will be more interesting. At this time, a figure in a black robe seemed to be silently watching the yin-yang bat. At this moment, the yin-yang bat had begun to show signs of retreat under the fierce attack of the nine-headed flamingo, and Bai Mu's battle with Li Junzhong even beat Li Junzhong back step by step. It seemed that everything was going in a good direction. The big devil Li Junzhong seemed to be killed by a hero. The flames of the nine-headed flamingo burned the yin-yang bat like crazy, causing it to scream miserably. At this moment, Bai Mu kicked Li Junzhong in the chest. At this moment, Li Junzhong retreated several steps in succession before he managed to stabilize his body. However, a moment later, a mouthful of blood spurted out. Among the countless people watching the live broadcast, a man in a black robe made a hand gesture and silently recited a mysterious and obscure spell. Li Junzhong climbed up with difficulty, but was kicked over by Bai Mu. Bai Mu suddenly flashed forward and stepped on Li Junzhen's chest. There was a bit of pride in his eyes, and a sneer at the corner of his mouth. Don't you admit that you have lost now? At this time, Bai Mu obviously thought that he had won. After all, in front of Chen Bing, a beautiful woman, he should show a good performance. I. Bai Mu's mouth corners were slightly raised with a smile. What do you mean? You are just a joke, so ridiculous. Li Junzhong let out a painful roar, and then his body began to slowly show a blood-red color. As soon as the light came, it poured directly into his crown. Bai Mu was not a fool at this time. Of course he could understand that Li Junzhong might have some kind of opportunity and someone must be helping him. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 216. So at this time, Li Junzhen's face suddenly became ugly. His eyes were fixed on Bai Mu, and there was a cold light in his eyes. A cold killing intent quietly emerged from his body. Bai Mu also knew that Li Junzhong might be abnormal at this moment, so he did not dare to hesitate for a moment. He suddenly stepped forward and came to Li Junzhong. He waved his arms and chopped towards Li Junzhen's neck. Cutting the grass and eradicating the roots was the only thought in Bai Mu's mind at this moment. For some reason, he was a little terrified at this time, and always felt that something bad was going to happen. For some reason, Bai Mu felt that the power in his palm seemed to be controlled by a powerful force. His face was pale and there was a flash of disbelief in his eyes. At this time, Li Junzhong suddenly smiled. He turned his head and stared at Bai Mu. The faint smile on his lips became more and more obvious. A cold aura came over him, and Bai Mu's face turned pale. At this time, Bai Mu seemed to have suddenly remembered something. He suddenly jumped sideways to the side, but it was too late for him to dodge. Even if he wanted to avoid the attack of this guy, it was too late. Li Junzhong kicked Bai Mu in the chest without saying a word. Bai Mu flew backwards and fell heavily to the ground. At this time, Bai Mu's face turned pale. His eyes were full of helplessness, and a bitter smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. At this moment, he only felt his chest surging, and then a mouthful of blood spurted out directly. At this moment, Bai Mu's face suddenly became ugly, and Li Junzhong slowly walked towards Bai Mu. His eyes were full of contempt and disdain. Bai Mu's eyes were a little colder, and the murderous intent on his body was quietly released. Little guy, there is a road to heaven but you don't take it, and there is no door to hell but you come to it. Since you want to die, it would be unreasonable for me not to fulfill your wish. Li Junzhong said slowly, and at this time, after hearing what Li Junzhong said, Bai Mu's face instantly became ugly, and he showed some helplessness, and a bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Someone is helping you, who is it? Who is helping you? At this time, Li Junzhen's eyes were full of mockery, his eyes were fixed on Bai Mu, and his eyes and eyebrows were full of contempt. You don't need to worry about this. Anyway, you will definitely die this time. What else is there to say? Li Junzhen's eyes were full of gloom. His eyes were fixed on Bai Mu, making Bai Mu feel like he was falling into an ice cave. But after a moment, Bai Mu suddenly laughed. He laughed very happily, as if he had encountered the funniest joke in the world. Ha ha ha, interesting, it's really interesting, very good, very good. At this time, Bai Mu gritted his teeth, and the gloom in his eyes was shown without reservation, giving people an inexplicable sense of fear. For some reason, Li Junzhong actually felt the breath of his own kind on Bai Mu's body at this time. Li Junzhen's eyes were fixed on Bai Mu again, and his eyes were quite complicated, and the murderous intent on his body quietly emerged. Boy, stop playing tricks with me. Since you want to die, I will feel bad if I don't help you. I will kill you today. After Li Junzhong finished speaking, he suddenly rushed towards Bai Mu. His speed was so fast that he arrived in front of Bai Mu in the blink of an eye. Then he kicked Bai Mu directly and knocked him out. In the end, Bai Mu fell heavily to the ground, and blood spurted out of his mouth. His face turned pale. Li Junzhen's eyes and eyebrows were full of gloom. His eyes stared at Bai Mu, and his eyes were quite cold. How is it? I thought you had some skills, but now it seems that you are just so vulnerable, not worth mentioning. Bai Mu's face froze, and then he stood up slowly, and then he gently wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. His face began to become gloomy, and his eyes were fixed on Li Junzheng. Originally, I didn't want you to know this secret, but you insisted on seeking death. If I don't fulfill it, how can you justify it? So you should just die. After Bai Mu finished speaking, he suddenly flew towards Li Junzheng. At this time, the original yin-yang bat was also biting the 9 flamingos desperately, but it only lasted a moment. The flamingo actually let out a long cry and sent the yin-yang bat flying away. The scene reversed almost in an instant. After everyone saw this scene, their eyes were full of disbelief. It was hard for them to believe that what they were seeing was real. And just after this moment, a figure came galloping over like this. The figure was extremely fast. In just a moment, he had already arrived in front of Bai Mu. Then, the figure's sudden weakness directly penetrated him. White curtain chest. Bai Mu's breath began to disperse rapidly, and the 9-headed flamingo was seized by the yin-yang bat, opened its bloody mouth, and bit the 9-headed flamingo's neck in one bite. The aura on the 9-headed flamingo began to disperse rapidly, and the power on the body began to go crazy at the same time, moving toward the yin-yang bat so suddenly. Almost in an instant, the 9-headed flamingos disappeared. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 217. And just a moment later, the figure slowly emerged, and it turned out to be a shadow. The appearance of this shadow shocked everyone. This person is exactly who Li Junzheng is without a doubt. But when everyone looked at the Li Junzheng in front of them, they couldn't help but feel a little curious, because there was also a Li Junzheng before them. Everyone's eyes were staring straight at the 2 Li Junzheng in front of them. Is it possible that this guy is a twin? Even Li Junzheng had a look of disbelief in his eyes after seeing this scene. He couldn't believe that the guy in front of him actually looked so similar to himself. His eyes were like this. He stared hard at the guy in front of him, his eyes and brows full of confusion. Who the hell are you? Stop pretending to be a ghost here and come to challenge me. Li Junzhen's eyes were fixed on that guy, with a gloomy look in his eyes, and the corner of the man's mouth was even more sneer, and he turned his head towards Li Junzheng. Junzheng glanced here, his eyes full of ridicule. You don't need to worry about who I am. You only need to know one thing, that is, the 2 of us are friends. I am here to help you. You only need to know this matter. As for other things, listen to me. Just make my arrangements. The man's eyes were fixed on Li Junzheng, a hint of coldness flashed in his eyes, a slight sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth, and the killing intent suddenly surged in his body. And just after this moment, a gloomy feeling shot straight into the sky. In just a moment, the man actually opened his mouth and swallowed the original Li Junzheng in front of him. After he devoured Li Junzheng, the yin-yang bat actually started to let out a weird laugh, as if something happy had happened. His master was born and died as a strange beast, and he was still so happy. I'm afraid not many people, and everyone even more, didn't understand what was going on. At this moment, the yin-yang bat suddenly rushed into the body of the previous person. As for the previous person, the aura on his body started to become stronger bit by bit at this moment, giving people the illusion that this person's power was comparable to that between heaven and earth. A moment later, the man flew out suddenly. The man's speed was extremely fast, and his power was extremely fast. In just a short moment, he had already arrived. Wang Yu, Chen Bing, and before Bai Han. The man suddenly moved towards Wang Yu and grabbed him directly. At this time, Wang Yu obviously did not expect that the guy would target her like this and attack directly towards her. His face suddenly darkened, and then he subconsciously closed his eyes, and there was a bit of panic in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. At this time, Bai Han was hiding far away, not daring to step forward at all, let alone come to save Wang Yu. Chen Bing glanced at Bai Han, his eyes filled with contempt. Didn't you keep saying you loved her back then? What's wrong? Now you're probably afraid after seeing someone who is stronger than you, right? Bai Han's eyes were staring at Chen Bing. Obviously he was also angered by Chen Bing's remarks. The murderous intention on his body quietly emerged, and everything in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows was a kind of gloomy color. I advise you to think carefully before speaking. Careful things come from your mouth, and disasters come from your mouth. Some things are not something you can just talk nonsense about. At this time, Chen Bing's mouth was full of sarcasm. He just turned his head, glanced at Bai Han lightly, and then shook his head. I originally thought you might have some abilities, but now it seems like nothing more than that. To put it into detail, it's simply ridiculous. After Chen Bing finished speaking, his mind moved, and then a fox with snow-like fur suddenly appeared behind him. However, this fox looked a little weird, and her eyes turned blue. One red. What? It's actually the yin-yang demon fox. This yin-yang demon fox is inherited from the ancient bloodline. Shouldn't it be extinct by now? Why is there a yin-yang demon fox in your little girl? Li Junzhong said in a cold voice, with a completely cold look in his eyes, and there was a hint of excitement on the tip of his eyebrows. Even Chen Bing had no idea what the reason was. Chen Bing turned his head and glanced at Li Junzhong coldly. Then a cold smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. If I guessed correctly, you should have just been. Li Junzhong has already been taken away. Who are you? After hearing what Chen Bing said, the man just shook his head and smiled. Who am I? It's none of your business. Little girl, I have something to tell you today. Sometimes arrogance and domineering will kill people. When Chen Bing heard what Li Junzhong said, he was slightly stunned at first, but after a moment he waved his hand casually. If you want to kill me, I'm afraid you are not worthy. At this time, after Li Junzhong heard what Chen Bing said, he looked at the yin-yang demon fox again, and a unique color flashed across the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. Exotic beast, yin-yang fox lord level 6, level 49. Qualification, alien, intermediate. Life, 999999999. Speed, 999999999. Defense, 999999999. Attack, 999999999. Skills, Power of Fox, Fox Charm, Disaster in the World, Name of Beauty. Power of Fox, Yin-Yang Fox activates skills to enhance its tail with supreme power, and uses its tail to attack, which can directly hit the soul of others. Ordinary people will die in an instant. Fox Charm, Yin-Yang Fox activates skills, with supreme demonic power, directly scatters the soul of people, killing people invisibly. Disaster in the World, Yin-Yang Fox activates skills, with the opportunity of heaven and earth, commands all laws in the world, directly attacks the soul of everyone, killing people invisibly. Beauty's Name, Yin-Yang Fox activates a skill to charm the enemy, making them willing to go through fire and water for it. It can also devour the souls of others and kill people in an instant. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 218. At this time, Chen Bing's eyes flashed with a bit of gloom, and the murderous intent on her body began to quietly emerge. At this time, there was a faint smile on the corner of her mouth. I just don't know if my hospitality this time will satisfy you. Chen Bing's eyes were fixed on the smile at the corner of Li Junzhen's mouth in front of him, which began to become more and more obvious. At this time, after hearing what Chen Bing said, Li Junzhen's eyes changed. A bit of gloom flashed through him, and the killing intent suddenly arose in his body. Little girl, I see that you really won't shed tears until you see the coffin, and you won't look back until you hit the wall. If that's the case, well, if I don't make it happen, you really can't justify it. Just go die today. After Li Junzheng finished speaking, he suddenly rushed towards Chen Bing. His speed was extremely fast. In just one breath, he had already arrived in front of Chen Bing, and then followed him closely. His claws were wrapped in a black aura, and even at this moment, Chen Bing had no time to react as he was completely controlled by Li Junzheng. At this moment, after seeing the scene from far away, Bai Han suddenly felt a little panic in his heart. Of course, he knew that the guy in front of him could never be his opponent. At this time, Bai Han gritted his teeth in the same way, and then quickly came to Wang Yu, turned around, and stared at Wang Yu with eyes that were quite concerned. "Color. Are you okay? This guy is really too strong right now. I'm afraid with our current strength, there's no way we can deal with him. So those who know the current situation are heroes, so we might as well." Bai Han's eyes were staring straight at Wang Yu. Wang Yu, of course, understood what Bai Han meant, so at this time, there was a bit of sneer on the corner of her mouth, and she turned her head and looked at Bai Han. A bit of coldness flashed in Han's eyes. "That's interesting. That's really interesting. Are you asking me to put her down and run away with you alone? I'm leaving my words here today. You can't even think about it?" At this time, Bai Han seemed to suddenly understand something. He turned his head and his eyes were fixed on Wang Yu's body. At this moment, he was gritted by Wang Yu's teeth and fists. "It's the rattling sound of the drill. Asshole, since you want to die, I will never stop you, but I have to leave my words here today. With the combined strength of all of us now, I am afraid that it may not be the guy in front of me. The opponent, do you know how terrifying it is?" Bai Han said this almost hysterically. Li Junzheng felt quite satisfied after hearing what Bai Han said. He nodded with satisfaction, a somewhat playful smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were filled with laughter. A hint of amusement flashed through. What this little guy said is really good, and it really sounds good, but so what? If I tell you to die today, you won't be able to live. Li Junzhen's voice suddenly started to sound older. Li Junzhen's old voice was almost unbearable and made people feel helpless. At this time, after everyone saw this scene, their eyes were full of disbelief, and then there was a bit of panic in the corners of their eyes and eyebrows. And just after this moment, a mysterious and strange force made people feel a little bit frightened. Then that terrifying force made people's eyes full of a kind of fear, horror and helplessness. Even Chen Bing could clearly feel the huge force on his neck coming quietly, and a cold feeling slowly invaded him. At this time, Chen Bing's face began to turn pale and ugly. She struggled desperately and slapped Li Junzhen's arm desperately, but no matter how hard she struggled or how hard she tried, Li Junzhen's arm remained motionless. And even the look he looked at Chen Bing from the corners of his eyes and brows was full of contempt. At this time, Chen Bing felt like she was falling into an ice cave, and she could clearly feel how weak she was. At this time, Chen Bing had a sad smile on her lips, and her eyes were full of helplessness. She just shook her head helplessly. "Everything is fate, everything is fate. My fate is like this. It seems like I am really going to die here today." Li Junzheng just leaned down to Chen Bing's ear, and said softly, "What a handsome girl, as long as you obey me obediently, I will not be able to spare you alive, but if you insist on going against me, I can tell you clearly that you will definitely die." Li Junzhen's voice was unusually old and hoarse. Although he looked like a young man, judging from his breath, he was clearly an old man. A somewhat sarcastic smile appeared at the corner of Chen Bing's mouth, his eyes were full of mockery, and the corners of his eyes and eyebrows were all gloomy. Old guy, you don't even look in the mirror to see how much you weigh. You really think you've lost your body? Could it be that this power is your own? It's ridiculous to say that. After Chen Bing finished speaking, he burst out laughing. He laughed very happily, and the way the branches trembled was even more intoxicating. At this time, when Li Junzhong saw Chen Bing like this, some extremely complicated emotions emerged in his heart. At this moment, he gritted his teeth and spoke every word. Woman, you will regret it. At this time, Chen Bing also slowly turned his head towards Li Junzhong, and just glanced coldly, with a bit of gloom in his eyes. Then tell me how I will regret it? I'm really curious, how can you make me regret it? Chen Bing was gnashing his teeth like this, and at this moment, Li Junzhong didn't know why, but suddenly found that Chen Bing was a bit scary at this moment. Li Junzhong swallowed the same way at that time, and a few meaningful colors flashed in his eyes. He turned his head, his eyes fixed on Chen Bing. You are very interesting, woman, you know how to do it. Regret it? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Chang. Chapter 219. Li Junzhong looked at the beautiful woman in front of him, and suddenly he felt murderous. After all, no matter how beautiful a woman is, if she is not used by him, she is equivalent to this useless person, let alone his enemy. It would be cruel to oneself to keep him alive. So when Li Junzhong thought of this, the murderous intention in his body suddenly emerged. And after this moment, he suddenly exerted force with his hands, and then he suddenly moved towards Chen Bing's body. He patted it over and saw that Li Junzheng's palm was about to pat Chen Bing Tianlinga er. At this moment, Chen Bing closed his eyes as if resigned to his fate. Of course he knew that he might die like this, but at this moment, she was not unwilling at all, because Chen Bing was quite calm about her fate. But at this moment, a cold light flashed in the distance, and then Li Junzheng's arm was directly slid off by the cold light. At this moment, Li Junzhong only felt a sharp pain in his arm. His face began to look ugly, and then he slowly opened his eyes and glanced coldly in that direction. There was a bit of gloom in his eyes, and the killing intent in his body was released without reservation. Boy, you still dare to hurt me. If you want to die, then if I don't succeed, you are quite capable. It doesn't make sense. In this case, I will send you to death today. After Li Junzhong finished speaking, he galloped towards Lin Yu without saying a word. The ice and fire beasts in the distance had gained some intelligence after seeing these humans killing each other. He calmly stood aside and watched the fire from the other side. Of course he wanted these stupid humans to kill each other first. When the time comes, it will be up to you to solve the problem. Of course, this was what the ice and fire beast had thought before. After seeing Lin Yu at this moment, the ice and fire beast suddenly felt a bit of fear in his heart for some reason. The eyes of this ice and fire beast were fixed on Lin Yu. His face twisted slightly, and there was a sense of panic on his face. For some reason, he felt a wave of blood coming from this human being. The power. Of course, the ice and fire beast knew that this matter could never continue like this. If it continued like this, I'm afraid this human would kill him. So when the ice and fire beast thought of this, it opened its big mouth and suddenly rushed towards Lin Yu. Obviously, even Lin Yu never expected that the ice and fire beast who was watching the show with the beast now actually attacks him directly. Chen Bing's beautiful eyes opened slightly. When she opened her eyes, she saw an evil face. At this time, after Chen Bing saw this face, there was infinite throbbing in her heart. The girl's heart was pounding like a deer. At this time, the girl's eyes were staring straight at Lin Yu, with a somewhat complicated meaning in her eyes. This man seems to be a player from the Dragon Kingdom, But why have I never seen him? Could it be that he is not from one of these big families? After the girl thought of this, her face froze slightly, a strange color flashed in her eyes, and then a wry smile appeared at the corner of her mouth, and then she shook her head in the same way. What am I thinking? Who this person is doesn't seem to have much to do with me. How much strength this guy has nothing to do with me. But for some reason, the more Chen Bing wanted to ignore Lin Yu, the more he couldn't help but want to peek at Lin Yu. And at this moment, Li Junzhen's originally severed arm was actually reattached by him. At this time, Li Junzhen's eyes flashed with a bit of gloomy murderous intent. Ha ha ha, little guy, if there is a way to heaven, don't take it. If there is no door to hell, you can throw yourself into it. Since you want to seek death, then if I don't make it happen, you really can't explain it. I've never seen it before. There are people like you. Old guy, occupying other people's bodies and doing such things, I'm afraid it's a bit unjustifiable. Where did you come from? Where are you going back? I will spare your life today, otherwise, you will die. Lin Yu just said this unhurriedly, his eyes were quite gloomy, and the murderous intention in his body began to quietly emerge. Li Junzheng didn't know why, but suddenly there was something in his heart. Feeling fear, he subconsciously took a few steps back. But after a moment, he stabilized his figure, turned his head, looked at Lin Yu, and then started laughing. Ha ha ha, it's interesting. It's really interesting. Little guy, you actually dare to talk to me like this. This is really something I didn't expect. Since you want to seek death, today I will let it be fulfilled for you. Li Junzheng pinched it with both hands, and then the yin-yang bat suddenly flew out of his body. The yin-yang bat directly integrated into Li Junzhen's descendants, and then Li Junzhen's descendants suddenly appeared. A pair of wings. And not only that, Li Junzhen's claws are also like bats at this moment. Li Junzheng at this moment may not be called a human being. Although Lin Yu felt that Li Junzhen's strength might not be surprising, even he was somewhat unexpected by Li Junzhen's current attitude. Lin Yu's eyes were staring straight at Li Junzheng. A strange beast with a dark attribute can actually merge with a human. You must have practiced the skills of this strange beast. Maybe you can no longer be called a human being. Lin Yu said in a deep voice. After Li Junzheng saw Lin Yu like this, he also laughed like this. He just shook his head, and then there was a gloomy look in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. Little guy, since I can see through my cultivation method, today I will definitely suck every drop of blood from your body bit by bit, so that you can experience what a mummy is. At this time, Lin Yu's eyes were full of contempt and disdain. It was obvious that he didn't take the guy in front of him seriously. But at this moment, a voice sounded in his mind, "Host, be careful, this guy's danger index has reached 3 stars for you." This is Arya's voice. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 220. You must know that although Lin Yu knew the magic of the system, he never expected that after the system was upgraded, it could actually remind him of the threat index. At this time, a meaningful smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. It's interesting. It's really interesting. If that's the case, I really want to see what this old guy is capable of. It's best to be careful quickly. The strength of this guy is something I have never seen before, so this time I will host you. Of course, Lin Yu knew exactly what Arya meant, but the artist was so bold that what he said was indeed true. Therefore, there was no trace of panic on Lin Yu's face at this moment. He really suddenly took a step forward, the corners of his mouth slightly raised with a slightly evil arc, and there was a trace of light flashing in his eyes. Of playfulness. It's just a small skill, how can I tolerate your mistakes in front of me? Li Junzheng just licked his own lips, his eyes fixed on Lin Yu's body. A cold killing intent quietly emerged, and his eyes seemed to be quite gloomy. Little guy, don't talk too much, otherwise you will die easily. Today I will give you another chance to say it again. If you don't satisfy me, I will make you look good. There was a bit of coldness in Li Junzhen's eyes, and a cold murderous intention spread out from his body so crazily. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what Li Junzheng said, a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. If you want to kill me, you have to see if you have that ability. Stop talking nonsense. It's a mule or a horse. Take it out for a walk. At this time, Lin Yu's voice had just fallen, and then he suddenly jumped up. His speed was extremely fast, and he was heading straight towards Li Junzheng like a cannonball. And out. At this moment, when the top executives of the 9 major countries were watching the live broadcast, their eyes were full of disbelief. Their eyes were staring straight at Lin Yu, especially the country M at this moment, which seemed to be planning how to kill this guy Lin Yu quietly. Come here, a blond man waved his hand. A very beautiful woman walked up to the man in a catwalk. She licked her scarlet lips and glanced at the man, with a rather charming look in her eyes. A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. What's wrong? Go and find out all the details about this little guy. I will give you 3 days. Within 3 days, I will see all his information. If you can't see it, what will happen to you? I miss you. You should understand, right? At the end of West's words, there was clearly a killing intent in his eyes. At this moment, when the woman heard what West said, she swallowed her saliva, and then nodded her head like a chicken pecking at rice. I understand, of course I understand. Please rest assured this time, I will definitely be able to do this to your satisfaction. West just nodded so lightly, and then waved his hand, a bit of snow flashed in his eyes, and the playful smile at the corner of his mouth also began to look even brighter than before. Be obvious. Very good. Since you have promised me, I won't treat you badly when you succeed. West said this calmly and coldly. Of course, the woman understands that although the man in front of her rewards her subordinates without mercy or distress, if she really angers this man, he will also show no mercy to her subordinates. This is how this man is. Kill decisively. The woman nodded cautiously. West just waved his hand gently. The woman stepped back wisely, and West stared straight at the woman's back. After staring for a long time, a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. This girl is really interesting. And just a moment later, almost at the same time, the top leaders of all countries were looking for real news about Lin Yu. Their eyes were staring straight at the screen, and at this moment on the screen, Lin Yu Zheng was inseparable from the guy from before. Among this crowd, there was a young man in ancient costume holding a folding fan. From a distance, he quietly looked at the tomb keeper and the snake man. The two stood on his left and right faces, completely looking like each other. Being meek and respectful, indeed, that was all they could do in front of him. King Guzhu gently shook his folding fan, a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and the playfulness in his eyes began to become more and more obvious. Interesting, this little guy is really interesting. I am becoming more and more interested in him now. The king of Guzhu just spoke softly and unhurriedly. At this time, the gravekeeper and the snake man were silent. Just because of a line drawn, the two of them fell into a period of suspicion. But at this moment, King Guzhu seemed to have discovered something. He glanced at the side lightly, with a special color flashing in his eyes. There are actually people peeping from the side. I didn't expect that there are so many monsters. It seems like this is a game played by others, or to be precise, it will be a farce. After King Guzhu finished speaking, he suddenly flicked his sleeves, and then a powerful aura suddenly appeared around the place. That powerful aura directly killed the big-eyed monsters who were secretly watching everyone. They were all killed cleanly. Originally still in the live broadcast room, all the viewers' screens instantly went black. After seeing this scene, the top executives of the 9 major countries also had a bit of disbelief in their eyes. They looked at each other, completely confused as to what was going on. What's going on? At this moment, the leader of the Dragon Kingdom revealed a bit of perseverance in his eyes. The original purpose of holding this competition was to let them explore whether there are those people in this world of alien beasts. Now it seems that our original guess was half true. There is indeed something here that we didn't know before.